Jeff McIlwain up. He's our chaplain for the jail to do a prayer.
Let us pray. On this day we come and we recognize so many who lost their lives on 9/11/2001. Almighty God, we come before you recognizing that we come in this community from many different backgrounds, many different faiths. We come from many different walks, but we come together as one. We come together united tonight. We give tribute and we give thanks. We ask your blessings upon this memorial service. Your consecration be divine. We ask these blessings. Amen.
Thanks, Reverend Jeff. You can be seated. 16 years ago today, it was a typical work day. Bright, sunny, blue sky, a little crispness in the air, but warm, much like today. However, that typical was soon to disappear when at 8:46, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center in New York City. I recall walking through the lobby of the jail that day. I was a captain of criminal investigations and I came over for some investigation we were working on. I recall walking through the lobby and seeing a bunch of people looking at the TV that was in the corner. Not unusual, but there were a lot of people looking at the news. So I stopped and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, a plane had just struck one of the towers of the World Trade Center." And I thought to myself, wow, that's a big screw up for a pilot to just hit one of the tallest buildings in New York City, thinking that it was an accident. At 9:03, well, the same group and maybe a couple other people were there, a second plane hit the Twin Towers. Now, I didn't see that. I went out and did my thing, and when I come back, I asked why so many people were there, and I asked what was going on. They said another plane hit the other tower. And I stood there for a moment thinking, I can't believe this is happening. And it was real apparent that the first plane was no accident. When United Airlines Flight 175 struck the other tower, we were paralyzed. And we would eventually learn that 19 Middle Eastern terrorists would bring the United States to their knees. Then if we hadn't seen enough in the past 45 minutes, we learned at 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, the command and control center of our military. And again, we stood paralyzed. We wanted to know what's going on. It seemed like a replay of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, but being played out in reality. 9:59, we were stunned to see the World Trade Center, South Tower, crumble. American engineering crumble. The largest building in the world, made of steel, crumble. 10:03, just 4 minutes after the towers crumbled to the ground, United Flight 93 was brought down in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And again, we asked, what's going on? Finally, at 10:28, the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. Fortunately, after the North Tower collapsed, this hour and 45-minute reign of terror was over. This relatively short period of time became the new normal for the citizens of the United States. Throughout the rest of the day, I recall our deputies and investigators responding to claims of suspicious Middle Eastern males, reports of suspicious substances. I even remembered getting a call that somebody had found a hand grenade in their garage. Now, I'm not sure why they called that particular day, but it seemed like there was a little bit of hysteria going on. For the weeks after that, we heard about the possibility of ricin and anthrax being sent in mail, ending up in mailboxes, office buildings. We sent investigators to check on reports of potential explosives. Privately owned airplanes being piloted by Middle Eastern males or people that look Middle Eastern. Again, our new normal. We were talking beforehand about the fact that we had 2 or 3 days where there were no planes in the sky. Now, I don't think we go through a day when we don't look up and see a plane going by, but 2 or 3 days when no planes were flying. That's how paralyzed we were. We spent the evening in front of our televisions watching nonstop coverage of this day of terror. We saw innocent people running from the North Tower, the South Tower. We watched firefighters, emergency medical technicians, police officers running into these towers, not knowing or even imagining that these buildings would soon collapse. We saw heroes, first responders, and citizens who became instant heroes by trying to help people get out of the buildings that day and carrying the injured to safety. In the next days, weeks, months, we learned a total of nearly 3,000 lives that day had been lost. 2,600 lost at the World Trade Center. A total of 246 lives were lost on United Flight 93, United Flight 1175, American Airlines Flight 377, and American Airlines Flight 11. The ages of victims range from 2 years old to 85 years old. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters. This devastation affected numerous families throughout our country and still does today. We also lost a number of first responders who, while others were rushing from the burning and crumbling towers, were running toward them, running up stairwells in the towers in hopes of saving as many people as possible. These first responders' selfless response to Call of Duty became their eventual demise. The New York City Fire Department lost 343 firefighters. The New York City Police Department lost 23 police officers. And the New York City Port Authority Police lost 37 on September 11, 2001. Since September 11, 2001, 1,140 individuals who lived, worked, or studied in Lower Manhattan at the time of the attacks have been diagnosed with cancer. 1,400 first responders who responded to the scene in the days, weeks, and months after the attack have died predominantly due to injuries sustained or cancer. We cannot commemorate this horrible day in history without recognizing the efforts of our military, who sprang into action immediately and continue to this day fighting to eliminate terrorism. We've seen the loss of an estimated 7,000 military personnel who have been killed in the line of duty defending this great country, while another 900,000 soldiers have experienced life-altering injuries. So why are we here tonight? We're here tonight because we cannot forget, minimize, or refuse to acknowledge what happened 16 years ago today. Too many injuries, too many illnesses, too many individuals and families gave all so that the rest of us can be here tonight and continue to live free. The memorial beside me that we're about to unveil will be a perpetual remembrance of those who have given their life and those who will continue to put their lives in danger so that we may remain proud Americans. We will honor individuals who went to work on a beautiful September morning, never expecting that they would not return home to their families. How did we get here? About 10 years ago, I was asked to join the Maine Public Safety Pipe and Drum Corps, which I'm honored to be a member of and have with us tonight. They heard I was taking bagpipe lessons with my 10-year-old granddaughter at the time and asked me if I wanted to join. Because of my love of music, my wife and I joined and have been with them since then. About 6 years ago, we were at a meeting or a practice, and one of them mentioned that it would be nice to have a piece of steel. What I didn't realize is they came together as a result of September 11, 2001, because they felt the need to have a pipe and drum corps that could play at fallen police officers' funerals, fallen firefighters' funerals, fallen military funerals. And I was honored to join that group. So they wanted a piece of steel, and I thought, yeah, this is a challenge. So I said, you know, I'm gonna get them a piece of steel from the trade towers. I knew that they were giving it out. I wrote several letters, made several phone calls. I got into the typical New York City swirl of, well, get in touch with this person, get in touch with that person. Time went on, I didn't have much luck. Finally, in November 2015, I reached out to a friend, former coworker, former boss, Noel March, the United States Marshal of Maine, who pretty much knows everybody, and if he doesn't, he'll find a way to know them. And I asked him if he knew the U.S. Marshal from New York. And I said, maybe, since some marshals come from the military and some come from law enforcement, he might know somebody that could give me a piece of steel. Within a week, I got an email back from the U.S. Marshal of New York with the contact information from the commissioner, or for the commissioner of the New York City Fire Department, Daniel Nigra. So I sent a letter. I explained that I was a member of the Maine Public Safety Pipe and Drum Corps, and I was looking for a little piece of steel that we could carry around to the various performances. And it had to be the right size, because we didn't want a moving crew to follow us around. So in April 2016, I got a call from a fireman. He was retired. He had gotten injured at the Twin Towers. Explained his story and said that he had been given my letter to call and try to reconcile my request for a little piece of steel for the Maine Public Safety Pipe and Drum Corps. So while we were talking, he says, I noticed on your letter you're a sheriff. And I go, yep. He goes, do you have one for the sheriff's office? And I go, no. I said, I'd like to have one, but I'm not going to get greedy. If I can get a small piece for the Pipe and Drum Corps, I'm a happy guy. So he said, I'll get you a piece. So about a month later, I sent a couple of the, I know it's Don Sedenka's here, and Dave Waymire, they're one of our volunteers in police service. They made the trip down to the New Hampshire, and this firefighter's wife drove the steel up to New Hampshire so that we could have a piece for here, and the Pipe and Drum Corps have a small piece for them. For the past year, I've asked a group of people to work on this, come up with a location, come up with something that looks really nice, come up with a design. Here's the steel. I don't know what you can do with this piece of steel, but do something. So I'd like to thank the Memorial Committee, my executive assistant, Kelly Maines, who's running around with a camera here somewhere. She's been like an expectant mother on this whole thing. Sergeant Kieran Sheehan, who may be in the jail keeping things running. Civil Deputy Julie Kilbride, Deputy Ty Leslie, I see in the background, in the front here. Deputy Dave Dunneman, sitting next to him, and Reverend Jeff McElwain, who have been working to design this memorial. But to make this happen took more. Our facilities department director, Bruce Tarbox, stepped up with his staff and did a lot of the work. Maintenance supervisor Mark Toothaker and Tom Perry from maintenance here. They provided the know-how to make this happen, do some of the work. Artist Greg Ondo, who you'll hear from soon. He's a professor at University of Maine Orono, an artist, and he's the one that designed this and did most of the work on the memorial. Blue Arc Industries donated some black accent rocks for the stones. Ray Saba, who works for facilities in the back, laid all of the granite blocks that we had left over from a project that we had going on here. American Concrete, Reagan's Monuments for doing the etching, etc. The volunteers and police service, I mentioned that they went down and picked this up. You'll see them, they're in brown over here. They're a force multiplier. They're a group of people that just want to give back to the communities wherever it is in Cumberland County. So thank you very much for helping us out with that as well. Lastly, Community Programs Officer Rachel Welch as well as Avery Lloyd, and Fidel Al Abusi of the Cumberland County Community Corrections Center. These guys have spent the last couple of months digging holes about 6 to 8 feet deep, about 14 feet wide by hand, so that we didn't upset any electrical that was there. Filling it back in, making sure it was compacted, planting flowers, sweeping the parking lot, really making this look really, really good. So thank you guys for your hard work in doing this. Now I'd like to introduce the United States Marshal for the state of Maine, Mr. Noel March.
Kelly, the expected mother, said that has to be very, very brief because he needs most of the time. So if that's true, this is going to move along pretty quickly now. So Erin Schnupp, right, just sang our national anthem. She's probably getting something to drink back there. And I didn't prepare remarks, but when it comes to an event like this, commemorating an event like that, I don't need remarks. I'm sure that you all remember where you were and the feelings you had at that time. But I want to talk very briefly about hope. Because Francis Scott Key, when he was authoring those lyrics that you sang for us, Aaron, had hope seeing that enormous garrison flag over Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And those soldiers on Iwo Jima with that flag being raised to offer hope. And the number of people that we have seen on our television because of our hurricanes and tornadoes and wildfires and so forth, those people coming together under adversity. Hope. And when we find ourselves with anxiety and fear that we are feeling again, for me, this 16th anniversary seems a little more poignant because there is so much turmoil around the world and here at home. And I think about how I felt 16 years ago and where I was. I have a little of that feeling now, but at the same time, I have much more hope because of what I see in the people who reach out and care with compassion and embrace one another and uplift one another, and that is what community is. You see, that memorial is not a gravestone. There are plenty of those. But that memorial, much like that flag, is a symbol of hope, a hope that we will always unify and keep our wagons circled around hate. We see hate springing up again, bubbling up, whether it's in Charlottesville or elsewhere. And we see violent extremism that is fueled by that hate. Say no to all of it, Americans. Say no to all of it, fellow citizens. This isn't only a memorial for those first responders. This is a reminder of the hope of the American human spirit that keeps this country great, that keeps us strong, that keeps us safe. And do not be afraid, as long as we have one another unified together and are reminded by the men and women who serve this country, by our friends and neighbors and family, our teachers, our clergy, our colleagues. The good guys always have the bad guys outnumbered, thousands and millions of times to one. From the United States Department of Justice, from where I stand as a federal law enforcement leader here in Maine, I have seen unity with our Department of Homeland Security. I see Chet and Jim and others who have worked in federal service, whose careers were directly involved and directly impacted by the events of 9/11. We are closer than ever before in law enforcement. And for that, I'm grateful. Maine leads the way. Durago. Thank you very much.
I noticed when I was talking, Representative Dick Farnsworth from Portland showed up, so thanks for coming, Dick. Our next speaker, for the past 16 years, 3 iconic ladies, Carmen, Elaine, and Joanne, have been standing on Main Street in Freeport from 8 to 9 every Tuesday morning, wearing our country's colors and waving American flags. They've done this in the rain and the snow, on beautiful days. Regardless of the weather, their commitment has been unwavering in the show of support for our country. Quick math, shows that in just single activity alone, they've dedicated 853 hours in each to this national pride. This does not include all the other events they participate in. I know alone, this is their third event today. Tonight, we're honored to have Elaine, speaking on behalf of the flag ladies, to share some of her commemoration.
It fell out, so I guess I'll hold it. I'm speaking because the other two won't speak, and they'll quit if I make them. So, you know, I, like the rest of you, my life changed because of the events of 9/11. We all know the facts, the figures, the horrible things that happened to people that day. But it brought me to my knees, and I said, God, please show me something I can do for my country. And my prayer was answered when 3 days later, then President Bush asked people on a Friday evening to step outside their homes and light candles. At that time, I lived on a dead-end street, and so Carmen and Joanne were there, and I said, well, let's go up on Main Street. I ran back into the house. I don't even know why I was doing it, and all of a sudden, my hand was on a pole that had a flag on it. Now, I must have purchased that flag at some time, but it must have been there for a long time, neglected by me. I grabbed it and went back out, and the three of us headed up onto Main Street, where we stand every Tuesday now, and I didn't know if it was appropriate to raise the flag, and so I was pondering in my head what I should do, when finally I decided to raise the flag. And when I did, people started beeping their horns, and they rolled down the windows and yelled, God bless America, and we can get through this. I looked at Carmen and Joanne and I said, will you join me for a year? And they said yes. But when that year came to an end, I knew our men and women were going to be sent into harm's way. And I said, we can't leave now. We're still there. Our men and women are still in harm's way. But our mission expanded. We have been all over the state. We traveled thousands of miles back and forth to Bangor to be there when our military men and women were their last stop before they were heading into harm's way in another country. We knew as we greeted them, as we hugged them, as I felt that I was their mother that couldn't be there, and I gave them their kiss and their hug as they left. And as it was, many didn't return, or at least they came back in a casket with a flag, or they came back months later with their injuries, and they were never the same. We were with many of the families in Maine who buried their sons here in the state. We didn't happen to have daughters that we had attended funerals for. There was one particular thing in Bangor, one flight, as they all were special to us, but this one particular flight, this young man, he didn't look more than 15 to me, but I'm sure that's a sign of my age. He was having a hard time. And so we always tried to get as many pictures as we could for the families. And then I spent the rest of the time, I probably had 40 minutes or so to spend with this young man. And I always carried things in my pocket, little token things to give to whoever, which I didn't know who they'd be for. So I reached in my pocket as I was sitting there with him, and I had a hand-carved cross, and I gave it to the young man. He seemed to settle down, and it was time they called his flight. I gave him a hug. I kissed his cheek, and he went off to war. 3 months later, his father called us to thank us for being there for his son. He said, my son left in a dark place, but when he got over there, he called home, and he said, Dad, I met 3 women. I now know there's people worth dying for if that's my fate. He said, I'm going to be all right, Dad, no matter what. His father called to thank us because his son didn't die in a dark place because he met 3 women in an airport. People ask us why we do what we do. If that was the only thing I ever did in my life, how could I not continue to try to show my gratitude to this family, to this soldier, to all the people who serve our nation, who would run into a building for the rest of us, who would take a bullet if that was called for in their line of duty. We owe so much, these people in the military, the police, the fire, the rescue, our sheriff's department. We are nothing without them. this would be utter chaos without people willing to take on these jobs that will protect us. And we take it for granted. Well, we, the Freeport Flag Ladies, don't. And where we go, we share our gratitude for that. We've had so many experiences. One was a little girl named Holly on a bus who was having a hard time. She just moved into Freeport, and I didn't know it until afterwards, but this little girl's face, I would see it on the bus on Tuesday morning, and she just was pressed against the window and just didn't seem to smile. And then finally she started smiling, and you know, we'd wave at her, and then one day she showed up on a Tuesday with a little flag in the window. And then she seemed to smile then, and we happened to run into her mother in the summertime, and they were moving, and she said, "I want to thank you." She said, "My little girl was having such a hard time, and she didn't want to go to school, but she kept coming home, and she talked about these three ladies that would smile at her, and she wanted to go to school on Tuesdays because we were there." And she says she finally got over her fear, and she was so thrilled to go to school, but she wanted to always have her little flag on Tuesday. You see, you never know. You just never know who you're going to touch. When you ask a severe and true prayer, it will always be answered. When you want to do the right thing, there's no such thing as something wrong while you're doing it. It's the only wrong thing is not to do it. We are so grateful to have been born in this country that we don't have to fight to get here. But I'm even more grateful that those men and women will fight that I can stay here and be free. That statue represents a lot of people who died that day, but it represents to me not just those that died that day, but those that died since that day, and those who every day serve that we might live in a free country, free of fear of being robbed or being killed or all the horrible things that somebody lives with in other countries. I'm grateful. And I hope all of you are, and you never take that for granted. Being an American, I am proud, but more than proud, I'm grateful. I could go on with so many stories, but there's many other people here that need to talk, and they need to get on. But I thank you for having me here, and I hope all of you go to bed tonight, and thank God that you're an American. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I know Carmen and Joanne don't want to speak, but let me tell you, every Tuesday from 8 to 9, you speak volumes. I'd like to introduce Andrew Colvin. He's a representative for Representative Shirley Pingree's office to do a presentation.
Thank you so much for having me today. Shelley would have loved to have been here, but is on her way to Washington tonight. She wanted me to share a few words. Dear friends, thank you to all who have come to today's 9/11 Memorial Unveiling. I'm sorry I couldn't attend, but I want to share my deep appreciation for the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office for creating this fitting tribute to those who lost their lives during the attacks. I'm sure you all remember where you were and what you were doing on that fateful morning 16 years ago. I certainly do. An entire nation watched the tragedy unfold on television that day, our heads in our hands over the terrible and senseless loss of life. In the days after, those lives became names, 2,977 of them. And those names became stories of devoted parents, of beloved friends, of heroes who spent the last moments of their lives saving the lives of others. Even now, there are no words to fully commemorate that tragedy or what our country experienced in the aftermath. But this piece of the World Trade Center is better than words. My deep thanks to Sheriff Kevin Joyce, Sheriff's Office staff, and designer Gregory Ondo for creating this space for Mainers to remember the victims of 9/11, honor their sacrifices, and contemplate how all our lives were changed that day. Very sincerely, Shelley Pingree.
Thank you, Andrew. A couple other people out in the audience I want to mention. We got Mr. Chet Lunner. He was the Deputy Director of Transportation.
Yes, sir.
When this occurred. So he was in Washington, D.C. and really was in the hot seat for a little bit. on September 11, 2001. Now he's retired to Maine. Another person is supervisory special agent, special in charge, is Jim Osterreiter from the FBI. As we know, a couple of these individuals left Portland, and I think he had his hands full for a long time. So he's retired, enjoying life, and one of our VIPs. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. I want to introduce Greg Ondo. He is the artist that designed this. He'll go over some of the things that were thought into this memorial before we unveil it. Greg?
Thank you, Sheriff. Oh, boy. This has definitely been an emotional ride. Having the piece of one of the towers in my possession did keep me up at night. As people would come into my studio and look around, if you can imagine an artist's studio is a mess. And yeah, mine's a mess. And there's pieces laying everywhere, like multiple pieces going on at once. And I would say, hey, that over there is a piece of the World Trade Center. And people's eyes would light up. And I would say, you can touch it if you'd like. And everybody that would touch it, you could almost feel the emotion coming out of them. The significance of a moment when this program started was one that I thought was truly incredible. During our national anthem, the Amtrak came by. And I don't know if we realized it or not, but the Amtrak had red, white, blue stripes down the side of it. And Aaron, I thank you for keeping course and carrying on. And I do think that that is very significant. Great job. I have a few people to thank. Jesse Salisbury, fellow sculptor. He helped cut the stone. Chuck Downs with Bucksport Monuments. Chuck was responsible for the sandblasting of the designs in the stone. And then I have a team of fellow sculptors, students, and young professional sculptors like Keith Stewart, who helped with the piece, Thomas Griffith, John Carney, oh, and again, that right-hand man, Keith Stewart. Keith has worked with me on several projects. This is Keith right here. And even Bangor Home Depot, giving us 50% off on crating materials. NH Bragg, giving us a price discount on epoxy. I'd also like to thank the Sheriff's Department, Kelly Baines, one of the most patient people in the world. And the Sheriff, Kevin Joyce, thank you for the opportunity. Oh, also the University of Maine, the Department of Art, for helping really fund the project through my sculpture studio and the facilities and the equipment that it takes to move and work with this material. The provost office at the University of Maine, they were the ones that actually purchased the stone that we were able to donate to this project. So a few thoughts on the project. The stones were actually cut to size that are in a proportion and ratio to the Twin Towers. The piece of steel that was given to me, that was given to the Sheriff's Department, was approximately 13 inches high, we'll say, and 15 inches wide by 2.5 inches. Okay, what can we do with that? Well, we should do something to kind of highlight it, hold it, cradle it as a significant element within the monument. How do we do that? Okay, well, let's come up with ideas. So I came up with some ideas, sent them to Kelly. Kelly ran them by the committee of, I believe, 9 people. it felt like there was maybe 75 people at times. But it was really an honor to hear opinions and take ideas that the committee gave to me and really think about what changes we could do. Initially, the steel was going to be mounted on top, but I thought it was a great idea to drop it down a bit and really have that idea of cradling and protecting the steel between the stone. Okay, how do we set the stone? Well, we have to probably have some pockets that the stone needs to fit into. Okay, what could be significant about that? Well, if we have 3-inch embedment on either side of the steel, that leaves, let's see, 6 minus 15. So there's 9 inches of steel that's exposed. Under the steel, we carved in 2 channels that run the length of the stone going vertically. By removing only 1 inch from the stone on either side, leaves an 11-inch gap underneath the stone. So the steel that is showing in its relationship to the stone is actually 9/11. The channels that are under the steel, if you can imagine, over time, as it rains and snows and ice and thaw, will actually patina the stone with rust lines going down the channel. Those rust lines could have some significance to what occurred on this day 16 years ago. Finally, I think I need to thank all of you, fellow Americans, and our veterans, and our armed forces for keeping the course and staying true to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. When we got the steel, we talked about what are we going to do with it. Quite frankly, we go, I don't know. So it's meaningful to have you explain that story and your artist's version of that. I'd like to ask the committee members to approach the memorial for the unveiling.